A meal that was complete in protein, deeply digestible, anti-inflammatory, and restorative in ways that no single ingredient explained alone. Modern analysis confirms why. Mung beans provide all 9 essential amino acids and are among the most easily digested legumes ever studied. Turmeric's active compound curcumin has over 3,000 peer-reviewed studies confirming NF-κB inhibition, the master switch of systemic inflammation. Ginger has documented antinosia, prokinetic, and anti-inflammatory properties across multiple systematic reviews. Cumin has documented antimicrobial activity and digestive enzyme stimulation. Black pepper contains piperine, which increases the bioavailability of curcumin by up to 2,000%, making the combination of turmeric and black pepper in Kitchari not a coincidence, but what appears to be the product of millennia of observed outcomes. The Ayurvedic physicians didn't know what bioavailability meant. They knew that the combination worked better than any ingredient alone. A peer-reviewed review published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology examining Ayurvedic dietary formulations confirmed the multi-target therapeutic logic of Kitchari's ingredient profile, noting that the combination addresses inflammation, gut integrity, and nutrient absorption simultaneously. Healthline acknowledges that while the specific cleanse claims require more human RCT data, the individual ingredient evidence is among the strongest in nutritional pharmacology. It has been healing people for 3,000 years. The mechanism is still being written. Dish 4. Bone broth, the universal ancient healer. Every civilization that ever raised animals for food made bone broth. Ancient Greek physicians simmered bones for the sick. Hippocrates prescribed it for intestinal conditions. Traditional Chinese medicine documented it in texts going back 2,000 years. Jewish tradition prescribed chicken broth for illness so consistently that it was called Jewish penicillin, long before anyone knew what penicillin was. Medieval European physicians included it in formal pharmacopoeia. It was not a coincidence that every culture on Earth arrived independently at the same preparation. It was observation refined across thousands of years into a near-universal conclusion. Slow-simmered bones produced a liquid that helped sick people recover. The biology of why begins with collagen. When bones are simmered for 12 to 48 hours, collagen breaks down into gelatin, releasing amino acids, glutamine, glycine, proline, arginine, in concentrations that are extraordinarily bioavailable. Glutamine is the primary fuel source for intestinal epithelial cells, the cells lining the gut wall. When glutamine is depleted, intestinal barrier integrity degrades. When it is supplemented, the lining integrity improves. Glycine modulates inflammation through multiple pathways and plays established roles in sleep regulation and neurotransmitter function. Proline is essential for collagen synthesis in connective tissue, cartilage, and the gut lining itself. A 2025 review in Digestive Diseases and Sciences by Mayo Clinic researchers examined bone broth specifically in the context of intestinal barrier integrity and inflammatory bowel conditions. The findings confirmed that its amino acid profile supports gut health enhancement, alleviates intestinal inflammation, and improves barrier function in both healthy individuals and those with disease. Ancient physicians didn't know about gut barrier integrity or glutamine metabolism. They knew that people who drank slow-simmered bone broth recovered faster. The Mayo Clinic review is explaining what they observed. Dish 5. The ancient Egyptian meal. What built the pyramids? We know exactly what the pyramid builders ate. We know this not from speculation, but from the archaeological record. from the remains of ancient bakeries and breweries excavated at Giza, from administrative papyri recording food rations, from tomb paintings depicting the preparation and offering of specific foods, from the chemical analysis of residues in ancient vessels. The picture is precise. Workers who built the Great Pyramid of Giza consumed emmer wheat bread, lentil soup, onion, garlic, beer fermented from grain, leeks, and radishes. That was the core diet. Occasionally fish and beef, but daily bread, legumes, alliums, fermented grain. This is not a humble diet. This is, by any modern nutritional standard, an extraordinarily intelligent one. Emmer wheat is a whole grain with a fiber profile modern nutritionists associate with sustained energy, blood glucose regulation, and gut microbiome diversity. Onion and garlic, consumed daily in large quantities by pyramid builders based on ration records, are now among the most studied functional foods in clinical nutrition. A 2023 meta-analysis in Nutrients found that allium vegetable consumption is associated with significant reductions in cardiovascular disease risk, cancer incidence, and inflammatory markers. The specific organosulfur compounds in garlic, allicin and its derivatives, have antimicrobial, antihypertensive, and anti-inflammatory activity across hundreds of peer-reviewed studies. Fermented grain beer provided B vitamins, beneficial microorganisms, and caloric density. The legumes and whole grains that made up the bulk of their calories are now associated with some of the lowest rates of chronic disease in the populations that still eat them. The workers who built the most physically demanding construction project in the history of human civilization were fed a diet that modern nutritional science would classify as anti-inflammatory, gut-supportive, and cardiovascular protective. They didn't build the pyramids on junk food. They built them on food that worked. The Egyptians understood that before modern nutrition had a vocabulary for any of it. Dish 6. The fermented meal. Kimchi, miso, and the ancient gut-brain connection. Fermentation is the oldest food technology on Earth. The earliest documented evidence of deliberate food fermentation dates to approximately 13,000 years ago. The ancient Koreans who developed kimchi, the Japanese who developed miso, the peoples of the Caucasus who developed kefir, none of them knew what a microbiome was. None of them had any concept of the gut-brain axis, or probiotic bacteria, or short-chain fatty acids. What they knew, through the most rigorous empirical process available to them, observation across generations, was that people who ate fermented foods consistently were healthier than people who didn't. The cultural traditions that preserved these foods weren't sentimental, they were clinical. Modern science has spent the past 2 decades building the vocabulary to explain what the Koreans and Japanese and Caucasian Highlanders had observed for millennia. The gut-brain axis, the bidirectional communication network between the enteric nervous system in the gut and the central nervous system in the brain, is now one of the most active research areas in medicine. The gut produces approximately 90% of the body's serotonin. It communicates directly with the brain through the vagus nerve. The composition of the gut microbiome directly influences mood, cognition, immune function, and inflammatory state. A landmark study published in Cell, one of the most cited nutrition papers of the past 5 years, found that individuals who consumed fermented foods daily for 10 weeks showed measurable reductions in 19 separate inflammatory proteins, including interleukin-6, a protein linked to diabetes, arthritis, and chronic stress, compared to a control group eating a high-fiber diet. A 2024 study from the University of Virginia isolated lactobacillus, the primary beneficial bacterium in kimchi, miso, and kefir, and found it directly influences the body's management of psychological stress, reducing markers of anxiety and depression in animal models. A Science Direct 2204 review of fermented foods and the gut-brain axis confirmed modulation of neurotrophic chemicals, including brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a compound directly linked to depression, neuroplasticity, and cognitive resilience. The ancient Koreans who packed cabbage in salt and left it to ferment were not practicing food preservation. They were practicing medicine that modern neuroscience is still catching up to. Dish 7. The Sardinian Minestrone, the meal of the world's longest-lived men. In the mountains of Sardinia, the rugged, isolated interior of the Mediterranean island, researchers discovered something that defied every existing model of aging. The region had the highest concentration of male centenarians ever recorded anywhere on Earth. Not just people who reached 100, people who reached 100 in good health, with intact cognition, physical mobility, and social engagement. National Geographic documented it. Dan Buchner named it a blue zone. Epidemiologists from multiple institutions descended on the villages to understand what was happening. What they found, at the center of the daily diet, was minestrone, a thick vegetable soup built on fava beans, seasonal vegetables, pecorino cheese from grass-fed sheep, and barley. Alongside it, flat bread made from whole-grain durum wheat, small amounts of goat or sheep milk, and a moderate daily consumption of Canano wine, a variety of Grenache grape that has among the highest levels of polyphenols ever measured in any wine studied. The Sardinians also raised their own animals and consumed them nose to tail, wasting nothing. Their diet was not restrictive. It was diverse, local, whole food, and deeply anti-inflammatory. Fava beans, the primary protein source in the traditional Sardinian diet, rank among the most nutrient-dense legumes ever analyzed in peer-reviewed research, providing L-dopa, folate, manganese, and a fiber profile that supports gut microbiome diversity. Canano wine has been measured to contain 2 to 3 times the polyphenol concentration of standard red wines. Polyphenols that research confirms reduce oxidative stress, support cardiovascular function, and modulate inflammatory pathways. A 2010-44 comprehensive review of Blue Zone dietary patterns demonstrated that the Sardinian dietary model reduces all-cause mortality and age-associated disease incidence across all measured outcomes. The men of Inner Sardinia didn't study longevity. They just ate what their grandparents ate. The epidemiologists are still working out why that was enough. Dish 8. Lentil soup dal, the 8,000-year medicine. Lentils were found in Neolithic settlements dating back 8,000 years. They appear in the Book of Genesis. Esau traded his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew, which tells you something about how valued that bowl was. They were a staple of ancient Mesopotamia, of the Indus Valley civilization, of the Mediterranean world, of ancient India. For 8,000 years, across civilizations with no contact and no shared language, lentil soup was the dish that fed the world's sick, the world's poor, and the world's wise, because it was cheap. It kept, it was easy to digest, and it made people feel better than almost any other food available. Lentils are now one of the most clinically validated foods in nutritional medicine. Not because researchers had a hunch, because every population that ate them, generationally, showed lower rates of the chronic diseases that are killing the modern world. A 2023 meta-analysis published in Nutrients analyzed 37 separate studies on legume consumption and cardiovascular outcomes. The findings showed significant reductions in LDL cholesterol, total cholesterol, blood glucose, and systolic blood pressure in populations with high legume intake. A separate systematic review in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that frequent lentil consumption is associated with reduced risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and colorectal cancer. Harvard School of Public Health lists legume consumption, specifically lentils, as one of the most evidence-supported dietary patterns for longevity in its nutritional epidemiology research. The mechanism is multifactorial. Lentils provide resistant starch that feeds beneficial gut bacteria, soluble fiber that binds LDL cholesterol, folate that reduces homocysteine, and plant protein that replaces inflammatory animal protein gram for gram with minimal caloric cost. 8,000 years ago, someone added lentils to boiling water, fed it to someone who was sick, and watched them recover. The dish survived. It is still surviving because the biology behind it was never wrong. Dish 9. The Japanese Ichiju Sansai, the meal pattern behind the world's longest life expectancy. 1,200 years ago, Japanese court culture formalized something that ordinary people across Japan had already been doing for generations. They named it Ichiju Sansai, literally one soup, three sides, and codified it as the structural principle governing every meal. Not a diet, a system. A daily architectural decision about how food should be organized, balanced, and delivered to the body. It has governed Japanese eating ever since, persisting through centuries of war, famine, modernization, and globalization with a consistency that no other national dietary pattern has matched. The structure is deceptively simple. Fermented miso soup anchors every meal. Around it, a main dish of fish or tofu, a cooked vegetable side, a pickled vegetable side, and a bowl of rice. What looks like a modest spread is, nutritionally, a precisely calibrated system. No meal is built around a single dominant ingredient. Every meal distributes nutritional load across proteins, fermented foods, marine sources, fiber, and complex carbohydrates simultaneously. The Japanese intuited, without clinical vocabulary, what nutritional epidemiology took centuries to measure, that dietary diversity within a structured system produces better health outcomes than any single food or macronutrient ever could. The nutritional logic holds under scrutiny. Fish delivers EPA and DHA omega-3 fatty acids the brain and cardiovascular system use most efficiently. In concentrations no land-based food matches. Pickled vegetables add microorganisms and fiber. Rice provides sustained-release carbohydrate with minimal inflammatory load. Tofu contributes complete plant protein with documented cardiovascular and bone protective effects. Seaweed supplies iodine and fucoidin, a compound now actively investigated for antiviral and anti-cancer properties. A 2023 review in Nutrients found the Ichiju Sansai structure independently associated with reduced all-cause mortality, lower cardiovascular disease incidence, and reduced dementia rates across multiple large-scale population studies. Japan leads the world in life expectancy. Their ancient meal structure has been trying to explain why for 1,200 years. Dish 10. The Blue Zone's Dal, the Loma Linda meal that outlives everything. There is a community in Southern California, Seventh-day Adventists living in and around Loma Linda, that has been studied by demographers, epidemiologists, and nutritional researchers for decades, because what happens there makes no statistical sense by any conventional model of American health outcomes. They live in the United States. They breathe the same air, face the same environmental exposures, and navigate the same healthcare system as everyone else. And yet they live, on average, 7 to 10 years longer than the American median, with dramatically lower rates of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. They are one of the 5 confirmed blue zones on Earth. The others are all in remote, ancient corners of the world. Loma Linda is in suburban California. The defining characteristic of the Loma Linda Seventh-day Adventist community is their diet, specifically a predominantly plant-based eating pattern built around the same foods that appear in the world's oldest medical traditions: legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, and vegetables. Many are fully vegetarian. Some are vegan. Their core daily dish is beans, black beans, lentils, chickpeas, served with whole grains and vegetables. It is, structurally, almost identical to the ancient Egyptian meal, the Mediterranean meal, and the Sardinian Minestrone. Different continent, different century, same conclusion. The Adventist Health Studies, a series of longitudinal cohort studies conducted by Loma Linda University with funding from the National Institutes of Health, have produced some of the most cited nutritional research in the world. Adventist Health Study 2, following more than 96,000 participants, found that vegetarian Adventists had significantly lower rates of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and all-cause mortality compared to non-vegetarian Adventists. A 2002-3 analysis of the Adventist Health Study confirmed that nut consumption alone, a daily handful of mixed nuts, as the Adventists practice, was associated with a 2.5-year increase in average lifespan. The Adventists didn't design their diet for longevity. They designed it around their interpretation of the original human diet, the foods described in Genesis. What they found, and what 50 years of peer-reviewed research has confirmed, is that the ancient diet works. It doesn't just work in ancient populations. It works in suburban California in the 21st century. 10 dishes, dozens of civilizations, thousands of years of accumulated observation from people who had no randomized controlled trials, no nutritional biochemistry, no peer-reviewed journals, and who still built dietary traditions so precisely tuned to human biology that modern clinical medicine keeps arriving at the same conclusions, study by study, generation by generation. The ancient dishes survived not because they were sacred. They survived because they worked, and the people who ate them kept living long enough to pass them on. Modern nutrition didn't discover any of this. It confirmed it. Click on these next videos if you want more related topics. Drop a comment and tell me which ancient dish surprised you most. We read every single one. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more ancient life secrets. We are just getting started.